Welcome to Chittenden Solid Waste District's Reducing Food Waste and Saving Money webinar. I am Recycle Rhonda. I am joined also by two of my fantastical co-hosts, Ethan and Robin. Do you guys care to introduce yourselves, please?
Sure. I'm Ethan Hausman. I conduct business outreach for CSWD. Glad to be with you today.
And I'm Robin Orr. I do event and community outreach.
Excellent. And I do all of the school outreach in Chittenden County as far as waste management or materials management is concerned. So today, you guys obviously have joined us for reducing food waste and saving money, we hope anyway. And so we are going to do a few slides just to introduce who Chittenden Solid Waste District is, why it's important that we reduce the amount of food we waste in our house, and then we'll kick it open and invite you into our homes. And so each of us, me, Ethan, and Robin, will be doing a small segment, maybe a 10-minute segment on how we practice or different techniques or tips that we use in our own homes to help us reduce the amount of food that we have to, that we compost, and hopefully we use it all up. And hopefully you guys walk away with some fantastical tips and tricks. And I want to highly encourage you guys to share your tips with us. You can do that by using the Q&A button at the, it probably is at the bottom of your screen. So you can click the Q&A and you can type in your question or comment. It doesn't even have to be a question. It can be like a tip that you have for reducing food waste in your house. And then also, if you click on that, you'll be able to see other people's questions that we are either going to answer on air or that we already have answered. But it's okay. We've only got a few people on tonight, so if we repeat questions, it's all good. But we want to learn as much as you guys want to learn. And I have to say, last night we did a run through of this whole webinar. And I think each of us, Ethan, Robin, and myself, learned something new from each other. So lots of information and tips and tricks to learn out there for reducing food waste. So without further ado, let's dive right on in to find out who Chittenden Solid Waste District is and what we do. All right, if I can learn how to operate this thing. All right, there we go. All right. So we actually own or operate 4 different types of facilities. Green Mountain Compost, which is where all the food scraps come. Ooh, that went a little fast, sorry. We're testing it out. So this is a very new webinar, first run through, bear with us. But anyway, we have Green Mountain Compost, where all the food scraps in Chittenden County come to get composted and made into fantastic plant food. We have 7 drop-off centers where you can bring multitudes of things to get either they go to the landfill, they get recycled, or they get turned into compost. We also have the environmental depot where all the hazardous waste goes. And lastly, we own the MRF, and in a great partnership with Casella, they operate it for us. And that's where all the blue bin recyclables go to get sorted out. But tonight, and then the services we offer are, so for me, myself, I do all of the school outreach. So I do all sorts of things with the Kit Kats, not as of late, which makes me very sad, but, we'll get back to what we're doing. We also offer a lot of technical support and educational support for events, and Robin runs that with the Waste Warrior program and such. At work, this would be basically any kind of business, and that would be Ethan's realm. And today we're going to be talking at the home. So basically we're going to be doing a workshop online all about how we can help to reduce food waste. And why do you think that is important? So let's take a look at this. This, guys, is a pie chart of all of the things that we in Chittenden County alone. So that's one of 14 counties in Vermont. But just Chittenden County residents and businesses, including schools, sent to the landfill in 2019. So over half of what we sent was actual trash, and it does need to be landfilled. I don't want anybody walking away today thinking that, oh my God, I produced like all this trash. We're gonna produce trash, it's okay. We just don't have to produce as much. And if you hone in on the, let me get my fantastic little laser pointer out here. If we hone on this little piece of the pie, the organics, which includes food scraps, leaf and yard trimmings, as well as like paper towels and napkins, we are sending over 60 million pounds of organics to the landfill every single year. Now, this is 2019. This was data before the universal recycling and composting law went into effect here in Vermont. So these numbers are definitely going to, well, not definitely, let's hope they look a lot different for this year or for 2020. However, we still got a lot of work to do here. We do fantastic as Vermonters overall as a state, I have to say. Very proud and very sad when I go to other states and they don't have the outlets that we have. However, we can do better. And think about this portion of the pie here, this 24% portion of the pie. Some of that is food that could have been eaten, but because we shoved it to the back of the fridge, or maybe we weren't aware of how to better store it, or our eyes were bigger than our stomachs when we went to the grocery store. Or if you're like me, sometimes you just stop in on a whim and don't have a list. So you start buying stuff that you aren't really going to use. But tonight we're going to discuss a bunch of different techniques and tips that we can use in our own kitchens right at home to ensure that we use up all of that stuff and we can reduce the amount of edible food or the food that could have been eaten down a touch. And then we can compost the rest. Woo woo. So Vermont came up with a food recovery hierarchy. I'll let you kind of just take a look at this. And this webinar is being recorded, so you guys will get a link to the recording if you want to revisit this. We will also at the end, after 2 days, we will send out a follow-up email with a bunch of resources in it. But you'll have access to this hierarchy. Tonight, we are going to be focusing on source reduction, which is basically how can we all work together, share our tips and tricks on how to save our food in our kitchen and not waste as much. 40% of what is grown in the United States is actually wasted. And I have to say, I'll share a personal story. I come from a family of farmers, and I grew up pretty darn poor. And so wasting food, one, wasn't an option in my house, but two, I have like ingrown or however you want to say that, respect for farming, because I know just how much time and energy and love goes into producing stuff, whether that's meat or dairy or vegetables, or grain or whatever. But so what's the problem? This is just one small slide of one of the problems. Strawberries. I would have never thought in a million years that we wasted so many strawberries, because they're like one of my favorite fruits personally, but only 55% of the strawberries that go to market actually get consumed and make it to our bellies. 10% are wasted in the store. 35%, guys, is wasted by us in our own homes. And so tonight, we're hoping, we're not going to touch on strawberries, but we're going to hope that we can prevent a lot of this wastefulness in the kitchen by giving you guys some tips and tricks from our own kitchen. And so to kick off the live demo, and feel free to add your questions and such as you're even going through our live demo. So after each of us are done, we will we'll answer all of your questions after each of us. So Ethan's gonna go first, and he's gonna demonstrate how to store greens. He's gonna talk about labeling your food in your fridge, which seems a little excessive, but I have to say, helps a whole lot. He's going to talk about how to put first in and first out, meaning like put your stuff that needs to be used first in the front of your fridge. Followed by Robin. She's going to give some great tips on how to preserve your herbs, how to use that stale bread that's been sitting around for a long time. And then I'm going to wrap it up with a couple of tips on how to store ginger, because I go through a lot of ginger, and storing it can be challenging. But I'm also going to give you, because it's winter and I love birds, I'm going to show you guys how to use some extra fat from your meat, if you're meat eaters, and how to turn that into food for your birds, and a fantastic food that they need, a high fatty food that they need to get through the winter. So without further ado, I am going to stop sharing my screen is what I'm going to do. And I'm actually going to turn it over to Ethan, and he is going to take it away in his own home. So welcome, Ethan.
Thanks, Rhonda. Welcome to my home. I'm going to start with a couple of things that are probably very familiar to people who have ever worked in a restaurant, because obviously restaurants have to be on top of their use of labeling very seriously, and also do first in, first out. So I know that labeling doesn't sound very profound. It's not in a lot of ways, but it is sort of the cornerstone of knowing what you need to use and what's going to go bad. So it's really pretty important. And I would encourage you, and this is where I say, not do. So do as I say, not as I do, because I'm not always good about labeling, but encourage like labeling everything, not just your leftovers, but also, you open the sour cream and you put the date you opened it on it, so you know how long you have before that's going to spoil. So label everything and make it easy for yourself. This is my trick for making it easy for myself, is having tape and Sharpies right over the fridge. So it really is as easy as labeling as I put stuff away. Another good place to put your Sharpies and tape would be next to your containers, your Tupperware type containers for food storage. First in, first out, or FIFO, is really important if you're going to be using the stuff that is going to go bad first, so that you have more time on the food that you just purchased. And if you're labeling well, it allows you to move the foods that have older dates to the front, and do that as you're going through the fridge. And that way you are seeing most clearly the stuff that you most urgently need to use. So this tomato sauce is not a leftover, but it has an opened on date on it, and so forth. It's also a great idea to write what it is on it, because something like this becomes a mystery after about a week in the fridge when you no longer remember. So I put both dates and what it is on there, and try to be really good about that, because that is like the number one thing I can do to make sure that I'm on top of using foods before it's too late. It's always frustrating to find food after it is too late in the back of the fridge, and that's what happens. So put the stuff that's most recent in the back as you unload from the grocery store. First in, first out. Food storage is actually, there's a lot of opportunities to extend the life of your food through good food storage, and it starts with using your fridge wisely. Keep the foods that are intended for being stored in your drawers in your drawers. These are humidity controlled and so forth. And so they really are designed for maintaining certain foods at certain conditions. One of the things to know is that leafy greens, for instance, like humidity, but not moisture. They don't want water droplets, but they want a really moist environment. So your drawer will help with the humidity, but you can also assist with that by popping a towel, a dish towel. This is kind of a fancy one, but any clean dish towel would work, or even a paper towel. We prefer you use something reusable. But in your box of greens or in your bag of greens, I just bought this bag today, so I'm gonna go ahead and add a dish towel to it. And that dish towel will absorb the, I thought I was going to, will absorb the, well, that's not an anticipated problem. Will absorb the droplets of water, but will allow it to release the humidity. So it stays moist, and then you're seeing the humidity. Rhonda, I have you up on my primary. Am I pinned? Okay, good. So that's a good storage technique for just extending the life of your leafy greens. On the subject of leafy greens, actually, I'll say that we have a guide actually that we'll provide in follow up about how to preserve your food by storing it well. So it's called our Save the Food Guide, and there are lots of tips, including that some fruits release gases as they ripen that will actually expedite ripening of other things or expedite spoiling of other things. And so being mindful of what you store together and how you store them can be really helpful. Tips like, if you put a ripening banana in a bag with certain other things, it will ripen them faster because of those gases. So you can actually use it to your benefit in that way. But going back to leafy greens, the point I wanted to make is that they are one of many examples of foods that can be used even when they are no longer at their optimal. And there's not necessarily any sacrifice in the quality of your finished food. And what I'm getting at is that just like these bananas that I don't think this is probably a particularly great tip because everybody knows that you can use old bananas for banana bread or smoothies, and I do. But you can also do the same thing with lots of other foods in terms of using them in another form. So mushrooms, when they start to get a little bit slimy, they are still fine in a super stew. Same thing with your greens as they start to get a little bit past, and so forth. So you can use those kind of vegetables in things like omelets or other ways that you're going to cook them, casseroles, soup, stews, to use food even when it's no longer at its best. And then similarly, I would suggest, I guess guacamole with avocados would be another example of that. But there are many examples of ways that you can sort of use your foods in other ways, and even make animal treats. That's another way to utilize food when it's no longer consumed by you. Your dog may be just fine with that food. And then my final tip is very simply that even the scraps themselves are useful for food preparation. And what I mean by that is that vegetable scraps in particular are great for making broth and stocks. And you can literally just save them in your freezer until you need them. And so as you create vegetable scraps, instead of composting them immediately, throw them in the Ziploc in the freezer, and then you are ready when you need them. Even something like onion skins. These are, whole tops of onions with the skin on. That is fine in a super stock because you're going to be pulling it out. The other thing that I save in a similar way, and here's your example of how I don't always label well. I reuse this bag and it's still labeled bananas from its previous use, which is another way you can save your bananas when they start to go bad is peel and freeze them. But bones, like people pay big money these days for bone broth because of its purported health benefits. And I can't speak to whether those health benefits are real or not, but I can tell you it costs a lot of money. And all you need to do is save these are rib bones and some other stuff from roasts and so forth. And I put them in my freezer, and then I have those ready if I want to make meat-based broth. And that can be a great base for lots of stuff. So those are my tips. And over and out to you, Robin.
All right. Hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about a few things, and I don't have a fancy webcam like those guys. So in just a second, I'm going to relocate my laptop so that the camera is pointing down at my cutting board so you can see what I'm doing. That is going to require relocating the cat who has just gone to sleep on the surface that the laptop is going to be on. But just before I do that, I wanted to show you my garlic storage method. I love garlic. I use it a lot, but sometimes it's a lot of work to, pull a couple of cloves off, chop them up. If you only need a little bit, it can seem like a lot of work. So if I'm going to chop garlic, I just chop it all. I take every single clove off the head, peel it all at the same time, chop it up, and then I put it in a, this works, or I usually use a little spice jar. Just put it in any kind of container that you can leave in your fridge and cover it with olive oil. Just make sure that it's above the surface, because you're trying to keep it from oxidizing, keep oxygen from getting to the garlic. And it'll last like this for a few weeks. And then anytime you need a little bit of garlic, you just spoon some out. The olive oil, depending on how cold your fridge is, but in most cases, it will start to sort of become pasty, like it'll start to gel because of the cold temperature, which is actually super handy, because it's really, you can just stick a knife in there and get some great garlicky oil to spread on a slice of bread before you toast it or something. And if what you're doing is sauteing some garlic at the start of a dish, you can just plop a lump of, the olive oil and the garlic. It'll melt in 2 seconds and be good to go. So I just always have a jar like this going, as when it gets low, I start the next one. So that's my garlic tip. Now I'm going to move the cat and the laptop. So you might want to close your eyes so you don't get seasick here. All right, kitty. There she goes. Here goes the laptop. Now, are you looking at my cutting board? And no, I cannot see you, so let's see.
Can you just lift the lid up just a little bit? Like yeah, there you go. That's great. Yep.
All right. So another thing that I love and use a lot of is fresh herbs. And this is just some parsley that I grabbed at the store today. And the way to store fresh herbs, the best way to make them last for a long time is to just treat them like cut flowers. Put them in fresh water, trim the stems off so that, that they have a nice clean cut on the end. And so I go through, I grab all the stuff that has the longest stems, sort of pull it together, pull the stems down so that the leaves are all starting in the same place. And then I chop the ends off so they're all about the same length, and plop them in a little vase or a cup or whatever. And I just keep them next to my stove. You can just snip off a few whenever you need it. And if you want to make them last really long, you can stick them in the fridge. They'll last for weeks in the fridge. It's really remarkable. So I usually just have a vase full of fresh parsley and cilantro, and often basil. The basil doesn't tend to last quite as long. And I found basil is particularly sensitive to chlorine. So if you're on like a town water supply, I recommend using like water that's been through your Brita filter or something. Because if there's a high chlorine level, the basil will wilt. But one of the key things in doing this is you don't want any leaves in the water or under the water for reasons that I cannot explain. That the leaves that are under the water start to rot, and then that causes all the stems that are in the water to go mushy and gross. So as I'm going through the pile, I set aside things that have stems that are, going to be too short, to keep all the leaves out of the water. I set those ones aside and just use them the first night, or find a smaller container that has a narrow neck that I can just stick them in. And then sometimes you'll end up with a few of these that look pretty limp. I put those in a cold water bath, and it's amazing. And you can do the same thing with lettuce, carrots, celery. Just take something that's just starting to look dried out, put it in a bowl of ice water. I took some that looked like this and dropped them in the ice water, right, just as we were getting started here. Let's see how it works. So this one did not work, but these ones perked right up. And this is another thing you run into a lot, is broken stems. Obviously that one's not going to be able to draw water up its stem. So I would cut that off and use that in whatever I'm making tonight. And this poor little guy doesn't look like he's going to freshen up. So I'll probably use him in a stock along with the little stems that I cut off and the other parts that couldn't be used for whatever reason. So the last thing I want to show you is croutons. And this is something to do with if you have a loaf of bread that went stale overnight, or if you have someone in your household that doesn't like bread crusts and you end up trimming crusts off things all the time. This is a super easy thing to do. So I diced up this bread a little bit earlier today, just put it in a bowl, add some olive oil. Don't be shy with the olive oil because the bread will absorb a bunch and you want to have some stay on the outside. Just toss it all around, get a little bit of oil on every surface. I often put in some herbs or spices. This is an Italian spice blend that I just always keep around. It's oregano, basil, dried oregano, basil, parsley, I think a little onion or garlic powder, something like that. So this is all you do. Just toss it in a bowl with the olive oil, scoop it out onto a tray, spread them out into a single layer, and pop them in the oven at 375 for 5 or 10, 15 minutes. The length of time is going to vary a lot depending on the size of your chunks and how stale or not stale the bread was. It actually goes more quickly if the bread was really stale. This was not very stale because I didn't have any. So these are just like the crusts off ends. So you pop them in the oven for, 15 minutes or however long, and then they come out looking like this. I would probably put them in like 2 minutes less time than had these ones in. They got a little darker than golden brown, but they're still great and can use them, on top of tomato soup or in a salad just to add a little bit of crunch. And then they're great just to snack on. Oh, and scallions, I forgot to mention, this is the other thing I keep next to my stove. Scallions, if they still have the roots on, you can keep them in fresh water right out at room temperature on your counter and snip off ends and use them, and it will keep sending up new growth. Like you can see here, I use these ends, and here's a new scallion coming up here. It'll just keep, as long as the roots are there and they're getting water, they'll just keep sending up new growth, and you just trim down the old ones while you wait for the fresh stuff to come up. And you can just keep scallions going for weeks on end, which is a really great thing. And those are all my tips for the night. So bringing you back down here and turn you over to Rhonda, who is now relocated down into her kitchen, I believe.
Yeah. So yeah, those are fantastic. I know that, like as Robin was saying, basil is very sensitive. It's like probably one of the more sensitive herbs. I found this summer like a great way to keep it, like even in a water thing, is to put a plastic bag over it, and it creates its own little like terrarium
like
kind of situation.
Yeah, like a greenhousey kind of, it stays humid and.
Yeah, so it's not getting wet, but it's like staying nice and humid, and it'll keep in water for quite some time that way. So
I've had incredibly mixed results with basil. Sometimes, I cut the stems, I put them in water, and in the morning they're all just like lying down on the counter. Other times I had a bunch of basil that rooted itself and just kept growing in my cup of water on the counter for weeks. It was crazy. I have not yet figured out the variable. I did notice that the chlorine makes a big difference.
I didn't even think of that.
So switching to filtered water made a big difference, but it's still not foolproof. Sometimes, I don't know what it is, the full moon or whatever, just bad juju. Every now and then it doesn't work. And then you can still, whiz it up in a food processor with some olive oil and garlic and whatever else you have around. I love throwing some artichokes in there, and you get a really nice, then add some of the pasta water that you are cooking with, and it turns into a wonderful sauce that'll really cling to the pasta.
Yeah. I mean, pretty much anything is bringable, backable, if you will.
Yeah, and basil is just too precious to not use, even if it goes wilty.
True that. All right, so I'm gonna chat with you guys about, and I don't know why this doesn't seem like it's switching back to me. Let me see here. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're good. You're good. I think you're having the experience that I was having where I was seeing you
Okay, all right.
when I was
So,
talking.
hopefully everybody can see me. I'm not exactly sure, but usually it's outlined in green and I'm not seeing myself outlined in green, but maybe it's just me. All right. So I'm going to bring you a couple of tips and tricks from my kitchen. One is I have, like, over this last summer, I got like deep into making ginger tea. I love ginger tea, but I didn't want to keep buying the ginger tea bags. And then I realized, duh, I can just steep my own ginger. The problem being, in the past, I have bought ginger to like make, and you need like, you know, a teaspoon of grated ginger. And then like what? Then it sits in your fridge on the door and it dehydrates. And the next thing you know, it's like, okay, I can't even use that ginger as fresh ginger anymore. So I learned, I don't even know where I learned it, but if you store ginger in water, submerged in water, so totally submerged, it will keep for quite some time. This ginger is a month and a half old, at least. Now I did take it out today. I changed, and you need to change the water every, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 days, just to make sure you're getting fresh water in there. I did pull it out today. It is a little mushy after a month and a half. So that might be like the end of its life of storage, and who knows how old it was before I bought it. But I did notice that yesterday when I did it, it didn't seem as mushy, but today it seemed very mushy. So I'm gonna just like, you know, grate that up and make some tea out of it tomorrow. But I think it's still usable. It's not like it's bad. And as growing up in my house, our way of finding out if something was bad or not is like, give it a whiff, give it a taste. And if it doesn't smell good and it doesn't taste good, then it's probably bad. Otherwise, just eat it. Labeling and dating stuff is a little better. But there's probably not a lot out there that's just gonna like put you like under or take you down all that quickly that's in your fridge. So great way. I just keep this right on my door too. So it's right there and ready for me to go. Ethan talked about moving. So in his house, what he does is the FIFO method, the first in, first out method. So he keeps like the stuff that needs to like be used up first in the front. I just have a tendency not to be able to keep track. So, and I lived with a 5-year-old for quite some time. Well, she grew up obviously, but so she would like open up yogurts and like eat half of them and then stick them back in the fridge. So we ended up with like 5 opened yogurts. And I'm like, kid, you need to like eat the first one you opened up. So what I did is I came up with the Eat Me First box. All right. So, or Eat Me First. I think it says please. Yeah, it does. We were trying manners in our house as well. So the Eat Me First box. So she knew this box with a yellow label, and she could read Eat Me at least. She knew that like, if she was going into the fridge, she needed to check this box before. And so the other day, Ethan and I were doing a project together, and I was embarrassed because in my compost bucket was hummus that I had made from like before Christmas. And it had got shoved to the back of my fridge because I thought, well, I'm no longer living with a 5-year-old. What do I need the Eat Me First box for? Obviously, I still need the Eat Me First box. So I was quite embarrassed that I had to compost that. But it taught me also a lesson. We don't learn unless we're making mistakes, right? So the Eat Me First box going back in my refrigerator. All right, Robin likes to store her herbs in water beside her stove. I do not, I don't go through herbs all that much. In the summertime, it's a whole lot easier, obviously. But even at the end of summer, I have a huge herb garden, but I just go around and snip it all. And I hang them upside down. I would show it to you, but you're not gonna be able to see it because, oh no, actually I took it down, right, huh? Look at that. I was smart earlier today. And so I have the advantage of having like high beams in my house and I'm able to hang up a bunch of stuff. So I just take my herbs and actually hang them up on old garden twine with little, those little like binder clips or whatever. And I just clip them on there and I let them dry. So in the fall, my house is like covered with drying herbs. But even if in the winter time, I need to like buy some herbs to make something, I don't use that much cilantro. So what I do is I just hang it upside down and I let it dry. And then I use the dried cilantro and the stems then go into my, oh, I was like looking at the wrong thing. My herbs for stock thing in the fridge or in the freezer, or I just leave the dried stems on the counter in a jar that's labeled dried stems. And when I'm making stock, whether it's veggie stock or a meat stock, I just pop those in. So nothing is wasted. I try to reuse as much as I could possibly reuse in my house. The last tip and my favorite, because I am like a diehard bird fan. I love my birds, or not my birds, the world's birds, but I love feeding them. And when I was a kid, like I have a great uncle who did a beef farming thing. So we had access all the time to beef fat, like chunks of beef fat. And we used to actually just tie it up with rope and hang it from trees. It looked kind of gross, but the woodpeckers and other birds really, really liked it. And I really didn't mind it. It was all good. Now what I do is I get friends that actually like cut off the chunks of fat on their meat. So if they buy like a pork loin or they buy beef ribs, or if you're making like a rib roast, there's always a lot of fat, like a fat cap on things. Cut that off. You can store it all in the freezer and then you can use that fat, and bacon fat works great. Chicken fat works great, all of it. Any kind of meat fat. You can render down and actually cook out the fat itself and then turn that into suet for the birds. And the woodpeckers really, really like it, although most birds will actually come in. And during this time of the year, when it's winter and the pickings are lean, high fat is what those birds are looking for. So I already made a bunch of suet this morning, but I've got this little piece of fat left over, so I just kind of wanted to show you guys what I do. So I keep all the fat in the freezer because it's easier to chop that way. So I just chop it up into little pieces like this. Little chunks, right, like that. All right, and like 2 pounds is probably really good. I used probably about 3/4 of a pound this morning, and I made enough to, well, not fill my suet feeder, but it's close enough. You just pop that fat, all your fat into, all your solid fat, I should say, into just a little pot, add just a little water. You don't have to measure stuff out. And then throw it on the stove on low. And that will cook. So this morning at like 3/4 of a pound of fat, I cooked it for 2 hours and it rendered almost all the fat out. You will see then the solids left over, which are also referred to as cracklins. Living in Virginia and Pennsylvania, cracklins were a huge delicacy. So some people are weirded out by it and grossed out by it, but it's okay. So you can eat it for a snack. I personally enjoyed some of them this morning. I'll have to be honest. But then I pitched the rest out into the yard, and my voracious squirrels, who also like to enjoy my bird seed and such, came in and like ate them all up within minutes. So again, very high fat for them, Very good for their, for especially during this time. So once your fat is all melted down, you can pull out those cracklings, and then you can take your fat. Now I add a bunch of stuff to my suet, but I add birdseed, I add peanut butter, I add chopped up peanuts. I added actually bacon fat to it as well. If you have chicken fat left, or any kind of fat, any kind of meat fat, if you're a meat eater, will work in this. Melt it all down, and then I just poured it in. I was being too efficient. I put it in the dishwasher. I just poured it in an old yogurt container. Once it cooled down to like 75 degrees, I poured it into an old yogurt container, stuck it in the freezer, froze it on up into a cylinder shape. Now, I don't know, you don't need a suet feeder personally. You can just like put the thing out on a platform and the birds will pick away at it. I have a cylindrical bird suet feeder. So this is the product from this morning. Oh, you probably can't see it all that well. The lighting isn't that great, sorry. But I have mixed in seeds and nuts. Oh, apple cores. That was another thing I chopped up. Like I said, I really like my burrs. You don't have to go over the top. But so there are chunks of apple core in there as well. And so I'll put this out tomorrow morning and it'll probably be gone by the end of the day. But if you get, like if you have a butcher friend or you know a butcher, go to them and be like, man, I want like 2, 3, 4 pounds of fat, of anything. Pork fat works fine too. If you're making up bacon, save the grease and make it into suet. So those, my friends, are my tips and tricks. So with that, if there are questions, there aren't very many, but I am gonna like sign off and run back upstairs because we've got a few slides of tips, like extra tips and tricks to show you guys. So, but I need to be upstairs to do that. So Ethan's gonna take over.
So now is a good time for us to address questions. So we can start with the question that came in early on. And that was about it's about whether we do a compost giveaway. And there probably will not be a compost giveaway, in part because we sell that product and still lose money on it in a lot of ways. There's the cost of processing compost, food scraps into compost at this point is not profitable, and it rather is actually a money loser, despite the fact that we're able to sell the finished product. We are looking at that's changing as we change our process, and we are getting to a point where it is at least a break-even endeavor, which is great, but it will never be highly lucrative because making compost is a labor-intensive process. So the compost that we make, we sell, and we sold out this year. Even selling it, it went very fast, probably helped by the fact that everyone was home gardening with the pandemic. So we are looking at ways that we could try to do like a frequent drop-off card or some way to reward the people that are bringing us food scraps often and want some of the product. But at this point, we don't have solid plans to do that, and are finding that we do have a hard time having enough material when the spring comes around as it is, even selling it. So that's the situation there. Are there I'm trying to think whether there's other things to add, Robin?
I want to show, I just took my croutons out of the oven, but I can't tip it too far. Or they're
a little higher. You don't need to tip it more, just higher.
Because of gravity.
Yeah.
But there they are. This batch is nicely golden. So yay. So that's how long it takes, however long it's been.
Cool. I had an observation, which was that when Rhonda pulled something out of her fridge, it was in a Talenti container. And one takeaway from today's webinar is that these ice cream containers are really useful for leftovers.
Yeah. And that's
so
totally the only reason I buy that ice cream.
Yeah, so a little reuse too. I'll throw another tip out that about freezer use, and that is that one of our colleagues pointed out that the ice cube trays are great for portioning things when you freeze them, not just ice cubes, but also things like coffee. you put your old coffee in your ice cube tray, and then you have coffee flavored ice cubes for your iced coffee. So that was a cool little tip on how to not have watered down iced coffee, even on the hot days, by using your freezer and portioning things as you put it into the freezer, or using the ice cube tray to portion.
Those are great for pesto too. I always make a ton of pesto in the fall, and you know, it's always hard to find enough small containers to put them in because you don't want it all to be one big lump. And so ice cube trays work really well. Then you can just pull out 2 or 3 cubes whenever you need pesto.
Definitely. And on that note,
real well though.
oh,
So it doesn't get freezer burn, like cover it real tight in plastic or.
right. And on that note, so we'll just share our last couple of slides of like some extra tips and tricks from not just us. I mean, these come from CSW staff throughout, like operators to management to depot staff. So we just wanted to share that because there are some really fun ones on there. But you will also be getting, again, in your follow-up email, you will be getting a link to a resource page that has all of the stuff on it. So you don't have to sit there and write frantically. Not that you really are, but we like to think that maybe it's that interesting that you are. All right, let me just share this with you. All right, so this is about organizing the fridge and the freezer. So again, Ethan went over the labeling part. That's my Eat Me First Please box. That was actually the original box in my freezer fridge when I lived with the kid from like 4 years ago. That's interesting. So keep your Sharpie and your masking tape near the fridge. Label your leftovers. Throw on a date on that stuff too if it worries you. Then definitely do that. Even like when you open new ingredients, get an Eat Me First box going, or practice the first in, first out, to eat the oldest stuff first and make sure you're putting that stuff in the front. Now, guys, this is going to take practice. It's not just going to happen overnight. So, you know, pick one strategy, like something new, and try it out. And if you've got a family, it might be a little harder to introduce it, but trust me, even with the Eat Me First box, the kid wasn't like all of that pleased with it. Because she's just like, I want a new yogurt. And I'm like, well, you don't get any new yogurt. I mean, she wasn't even my kid, but you don't get a new yogurt until you eat the old yogurt. But she got used to it. And then like her friends would come over and they'd be like, what is this? And she's like, oh, that's the Eat Me First box. We have to get out of there before we get anything new. And I'm like, go. That's what I'm talking about. Use your freezer. If your freezer is full, I mean, little chest freezers are really not that expensive, and I see them online all the time. I also see them at Restore and Resource all the time as well. So go there, get a used one, and stock it full of freeze stuff, like frozen stuff. And again, saving your scraps for stocks is fantastic. Portioning out your leftovers, like the pesto and the coffee ones, which that was a new one for me too, and a fun one to try over the summer. Keep your bread and butter if you don't go through them. I'm not a big breadaholic, so I often put, especially like really yummy bread or fresh bread, I put in the freezer because like I know that I'm not going to eat it before it starts getting moldy. And I'll tell you, even if it gets moldy, I just cut the mold off and then just use the bread that's not moldy, but shh, don't tell anybody. You could also store fresh herbs in the freezer. I also do that. I lay them out in a sheet pan, just pop them in the freezer overnight, and then crumble them all up into one of those little ice cream containers, because they're all over my house. And just grab a little handful of it to season up some stuff in the wintertime. Oh, holy bananas. What did I just do there? I did something different that I'm not used to. Oh, there we go. All right. Storage. This is like a big thing. And this is something that I have worked on over the years, and having worked in restaurants for, over a decade, this is something that is extremely important into keeping your ingredients fresh, especially if it's coming out your pocket. You want to make sure that what you're buying, the farmer's efforts and love that went into growing that and your money are put to well use. So know your fruit, especially. So there are fruits that give off a lot of ethylene gas, which helps ripen things. And it's fantastic if you got green bananas and you want to ripen them up, stick them in with the bowl with the apples. But if you already brought home ripe bananas and you're looking those to last all week, store them separately from your apples. Don't put them in the same bowl as your apples, because they will ripen quite quickly against those apples that are putting off ethylene gas.
Can I jump in with another one of those?
Yeah.
Potatoes. Keep your onions away from your potatoes. The potatoes will start to shrivel and grow eyes much faster if they are in the vicinity of onions.
Very interesting. Did not know that. Thankfully, I store them separately, but apples don't seem to have too much effect on onions, nor onions on apples, because I usually store those together. But that's just my observation. Secondly, as Ethan pointed out, control the moisture, man. Use those drawers and those little like knob things that everybody thinks are obsolete, which I always thought they were stupid and just some kind of hoity-toity little thing for fancy refrigerators. But I have learned that they actually work really well, and they do control the moisture and the humidity, especially the humidity in your fridge. So definitely check on that. You can store and revive your veg in water. So often I will chop up a bunch of carrots for the week for my lunch, and I throw them in a big like jar or a container full of water. And then in the morning, I just grab a handful for my lunch for snacks, and off I go. And those carrots will stay nice and hydrated all week long, especially the cut ones. And as Robin demonstrated, you can revive all sorts of things. I had a head of, wasn't a head, I forget what kind of cabbage stuff it was, but maybe Napa, I don't know. Anyway, it was some sort of weird cabbage that I wasn't familiar with. I didn't store it properly, get all like wilty schmilty, and I just shoved it in ice water for 35, 40 minutes. And man, I pulled it out. It was nice, crispy and delicious. And I had a delicious stir fry with it. So it does work. Your herbs, keep your fresh herbs in water, dry them. We already covered that. And then lastly, the pickling or fermenting of vegetables. And this is not like an end all to be all list. This is just ideas that we got from staff. Pickling and fermenting is like my new favorite thing. I mean, I've always pickled stuff. Growing up in a German family and a farming family, we pickled everything. However, the fermenting part, I'm really getting into. We used to make sauerkraut as a kid, and I never really like paid attention because, you know, you're a kid and you're like, ugh, whatever, it's just work. Now I'm like all into it. And I just got this book called Art of Fermentation by this dude named something Katz.
He's amazing.
The best book ever, and I cannot wait to like really start fermenting a lot of different things. But it is a fantastic way to preserve your food, and you can preserve your food from the fall harvest if you grow your own, or even if you get a CSA, which is what I get. And I grow my own food, but whatever. You can preserve it all winter long. You can preserve it for a year or 2 years as a ferment, and you don't need anything but usually salt and the vegetable and some water. Fantastic, easy peasy, and a super fun experiment, especially if you've got Kit Kats at home. Science. Yeah.
I'll put in a plug for pickling too, because I just ate last week pickled watermelon rind.
Oh.
It was at least 18 months old.
Oh.
It was pickled not this summer, but summer of 2019.
Nice.
Still fine. That vinegar works wonders.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, those beets that are in this picture are my beets. Those ones are from just in December, but I just got done eating a jar from, I think, December of last year. So, and they've just been sitting in my fridge just in vinegar. They weren't fermented necessarily, but that vinegar definitely preserves your food. So look in the preservation methods, and it might be something fun that you can do with your family if you've got one. Woohoo. All right. So with that said, thank you guys for joining us. We got a lot of different ways that you can reach us. If you are from outside of Chittenden County, there are some fantastical other solid waste districts out there that can help you out too. So look, if you're out of Chittenden County, definitely look for your solid waste district in your county. But I'll be honest with you, I don't think any one of us would be like, oh, I'm sorry, you're out of our district, we can't answer your questions. So definitely send us, but we've got the hotline, we've got our website, and then here are our emails. And again, this webinar is being recorded, so we will make that available for you. And in 2 days, you will get an email from us with a bunch of different resources in it. Also a link to this very webinar if you want to rewatch any of it. And again, if you have any questions, you can contact any one of us and we'll be happy to help out. Are there any other questions out there? It doesn't look like it. Excellent. So thanks guys for joining us. We greatly appreciate it. Spread the word. We're going to be doing this webinar again. In the follow-up email, there's also a feedback form. We would really love your honest feedback. Like, how can we improve this? What went well? What didn't go well? Where can we make changes? Because again, this is the first rollout of this this webinar in particular, and we weren't sure how the whole like invite you into our home was going to work. But we would like to hear your feedback and see how that went for you. So
unless it's about the cleanliness of our kitchens, in which case, keep it to yourself.
that is true. Very true. Thanks, guys. Have a great night. Happy Thursday.
Thanks for joining us, everyone.